Did you know that the Bible is neither the only nor the first source to tell of a devastating flood and the building of a saving ark? That a mythical god king once learned of this apocalypse when he was looking for ways to achieve immortality, and that researchers have long since found the tomb of this supernatural ruler? But that's not all. There is also a gruesome clip circulating around the web that is supposed to show us the corpse of the bizarre creature in the flesh. But how is this even possible? Could it be that the fantastic legends handed down in the ancient Epic of Gilgamesh ultimately have a kernel of truth? In view of the implications and questions surrounding this discovery, the following seems all the more incomprehensible. Nowadays, nobody talks about the mysterious tomb, which should not actually exist. Many an archaeological milestone has lost none of its sensational splendor to this day. Just think of the British researcher Howard Carter, who brought the lost tomb of Tutankhamun to light in 1922, and, according to some worried contemporary witnesses, also unleashed an ancient pharaonic curse. Also unforgotten are the farmers who stumbled upon the imposing terracotta army by chance in 1974, which has stood guard over the tomb for the first Chinese emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, for more than 2,000 years. On September 19, 1991, Erica and Helmut Simon went on another hike in the snowy Ortzal Alps in South Tyrol and tracked down a 5,300-year-old glacier mummy that we have known as Otzi ever since. However, none of us probably have the name Jörg Fassbinder on our radar. And this despite the fact that the German archaeologists made a discovery a good 20 years ago that was no less groundbreaking than the ones just mentioned. Back then, on April 29, 2003, BBC News published the following succinct yet profound headline: Gilgamesh Tomb Believed Found. Recorded in Iraq, this discovery should have sparked an archaeological revolution, but it subsequently faded further and further before finally disappearing from the public consciousness completely. In retrospect, this seems a little more surprising than it was in light of current events. Because we must not forget one thing: Fassbinder's team managed to create a sensation just a few weeks after the first US troops invaded Iraq. It is understandable that the discovery of an ancient royal tomb sometimes fades into the background amidst the horrors of war. But the bottom line is that the tomb was not the only thing the experts uncovered at the time. In fact, the researchers discovered the entire city of Uruk in the same breath. Fassbinder was quoted as saying the following about the tomb: "I don't want to say with absolute certainty that this is the tomb of King Gilgamesh, but it looks very similar to the tomb described in the epic." And if we consult the source mentioned, we learn that Gilgamesh was buried under the Euphrates after his death. Furthermore, tradition states that the river was diverted specifically for this purpose and returned to its old course after the completion of the tomb complex. In view of this, the question arises as to how one can find something that lies dormant under a mighty river. Well, through the use of modern technology, according to Fassbinder, it was the differences in the magnetization of the soil that revealed the hidden archaeological treasure. In detail, the deviations brought to light a very detailed picture of a structure that lay dormant beneath the sediments. In the course of this, the historical trackers created a magnetogram, which was digitally mapped, and thus created a city map of Uruk. And Fassbinder realized that there may be more truth to the legends of our ancestors than we can imagine when he compared the findings with the information from the Epic of Gilgamesh. No matter whether gardens, fields, or houses, everything presented itself as it was written in the millennia-old collection. In view of this, however, one could also draw an almost unbelievable reverse conclusion. If this part of the Epic of Gilgamesh is historically accurate, why shouldn't the other parts be too? Is the Epic of Gilgamesh authentic? Well, yes, because that would mean that the accounts of gods, demonic celestial beasts, and a man who attained immortality would also be true. The stories we are confronted with in the Gilgamesh epic are simply so fantastic and supernatural that the conservative researchers have practically no choice but to dismiss them as fiction. In view of this, it is obvious that the discovery of the real Gilgamesh tomb has the potential to shake up our worldview. But who was the legendary king of Uruk anyway? Although this question actually seems quite simple, it is extremely tricky. Despite the fact that Gilgamesh is mentioned both in the Sumerian king list and in other written sources, historians continue to argue about whether the legendary ruler really existed. The researchers who are convinced of his historical authenticity believe that he was in power in the early 3rd millennium BC. The skeptical, opposing side, however, emphasizes that most of the information about Gilgamesh comes from the mythical epic mentioned above. This, in turn, is a series of inscribed clay tablets that were rediscovered in the 19th century and translated by the English researcher George Smith. However, as the records have only survived in fragments, which were also written in different languages, the reconstruction proved to be an extremely challenging undertaking. In the end, however, the experts succeeded in piecing together the countless fragments into a meaningful overall picture and bringing the millennia-old myth back into the present. And the very first passage emphasizes Gilgamesh is not a classic king. He is 1/3 human and 2/3 divine. Feared by the people for his nefarious nature, the 2/3 god forces his subjects to work hard to erect monumental colossal buildings. In their distress, the women of Uruk turn to the goddess Ishtar, and in order to put a stop to the ruler's merciless activities, the divine council creates the wild creature Enkidu. However, the fierce battle between Enkidu and Gilgamesh produces no victor, so that the supernatural opponents ultimately sink to the ground exhausted and become friends. Ishtar later loses her heart to Gilgamesh, but the king rejects all advances, which is why the offended goddess asks Anu to unleash the devilish celestial bull. And although the beast then strikes down countless warriors of Uruk, Gilgamesh and Enkidu manage to bring the monster to its knees by joining forces. The gods then devise a cruel plan. They decide to kill Enkidu in order to condemn Gilgamesh to a desperate existence in solitude. The Ark of Utnapishtim. Deeply affected by the loss of his companion, Gilgamesh is also made aware of another fact: his own mortality. So the king god sets out to find out how to conquer death. And who could know this better than Utnapishtim, one of Gilgamesh's ancestors who has already attained immortality? When Gilgamesh asks him how it is possible to escape death, he gives a sobering answer: only the gods have the power to determine life and death. But Gilgamesh does not understand this. Why must he die while Utnapishtim, who is so similar to him, has eternal life? The immortal then reveals an ancient secret, the secret of an all-destroying deluge that once plunged the world into chaos. However, Utnapishtim was warned of the catastrophe by the god Enki, and tasked with building a large ship to save his family and the animals of the steppe. Utnapishtim followed the divine instructions, and in gratitude was elevated to an immortal god and taken to the realm of the blessed. If this story sounds somehow familiar to you, you have the right instinct. This passage from the Epic of Gilgamesh has unmistakable parallels to the biblical story of Noah's Ark. In view of this, many historians suspect that the older epic served as a direct model for the Old Testament story. In fact, however, the account of the flood is not the only connection between the epic and the Holy Scriptures of the Christians. If we take a look at the 6th chapter of the first book of Genesis, there is talk of sons of God, who descend to earth and father gigantic offspring with the women. The Colossi, who then bring death and destruction to mankind, are also known as Nephilim. The biblical sons of God are sometimes also equated with the Anunnaki. In the ancient Mesopotamian creation myths, these represent the gods of the upper south water heaven, and in modern conspiracy theories, extraterrestrial creatures that still control the fate of the world. And as mentioned, both human and divine blood is said to have flowed through Gilgamesh's veins, and according to the epic, he possessed superhuman powers. And lo and behold, the ancient depictions of the God King holding fully grown lions in his hands, as if they were cute cuddly kittens, also suggest that he was exceptionally tall. So could it be that Gilgamesh was directly descended from the Anunnaki and was himself a Nephilim? And what is the story behind the immortal Utnapishtim? Well, in certain circles, he is interpreted as the Mesopotamian version of the biblical figure Enoch. Mentioned only in passing in the official version of the Bible, we learn in the apocryphal writings that Enoch served as a mediator between the sons of God who had fallen from grace and the Lord of the worlds. God wiped out the Nephilim with a gigantic flood, and just like Utnapishtim, Enoch was also accepted into the kingdom of heaven without having to die for it. Does this video show the real God King? However, Gilgamesh's wish not to die was not to be fulfilled. The ruler of Uruk ultimately had to realize that he could not escape his fate. However, in the same breath, he realized that it was still possible for him to earn an immortal name for himself through great heroic deeds. The fact that we are still talking about him 5,000 years later proves that his name is still alive. And as mentioned, Gilgamesh is said to have been buried in a hidden grave under the Euphrates after his death so that he would never be found. However, this plan doesn't seem to have worked out. Well, that's what you might think if you look at the gruesome clip that has been circulating on the internet for some time. Allegedly captured on film in Iraq in March 2002, the video is supposed to show us nothing other than the real corpse of the legendary ruler. The magnificent grave goods and the glittering gold crown leave no doubt that this is not just any final resting place. And yet, the bearded dead man does not look as if he passed away 5,000 years ago, but only a few moments ago. Some alternative viewers do not only recognize the real Gilgamesh in the video, but also the true reason for the invasion of Iraq by the US Army. According to this viewer, the sole aim of the war was to conceal an unbelievable historical truth. This was also proved by the later reports of US veterans who said that phrases such as, "a soldier is silent" or "you saw nothing," were part of everyday life during the mission. In view of these eloquent orders and the impossible things the men and women saw, it did not take long for the true scope of the invasion to become apparent and for it to click with them. And now you are very welcome to click. Press the like and subscribe button now and never miss an exciting video from us again.